Okay, this is all about language, a series by the Early Years Project. So, within the series for language, we will have a definition of what language is, how communication and language are different, the two overarching types of language processing or how we learn language, developmental milestones, risk factors for language delays, how to make referrals, and how to work on language skills at home with some video examples. So we'll start off. What is language? Language is a system of sounds and words that are used in a highly structured way. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Language evolves. So when we hear the word language, we think about the different languages that are spoken throughout the entire world. But we could also see how language changes over time. So think slang terms, slang words, and how they've changed. So we have a timeline on this slide starting in the 1960s, terms or phrases like out of sight, and then to the 80s, tubular, totally tubular, in the 90s, as if, and then in 2024, another thing that we use is pop off. So we don't see individuals really using out of sight anymore. And think about how that changes along with all of the other languages spoken throughout the world. According to Nations Online in 2022, there were more than 7,000 different languages spoken. And I'm sure there are so many more that just aren't recorded and aren't reported. So now that we're talking about language, we've kind of talked about what it is. Let's talk about how language and communication are different because they are. So, communication and language do go hand in hand, and they both have to be present in order to develop language skills. And how language develops is really foundational on communication skills, as we talked about in the communication module series. So, communication is the act of sending the message. So, we have a want, need idea that we want to communicate. Language is the mode in which we send it. So, in other words, communication is like the road. So, we have the same starting position and the same ending position, the same road, but we may have two different types of cars. And language is the car. So both cars, like I said, are going to the same destination on the same road. One car is a Ford and one is a Toyota. So language can be different types, it can be different languages, it can be different ways that we communicate, but we're still getting to that same end goal. And that's the act of communicating, sending that message. So there are two types of language that are really discussed when we're talking about childhood language development specifically. But really, we're still using both of these in adulthood. So receptive language and expressive language are these two types. So we'll talk about receptive language first. Receptive language refers to what we understand of language. So we are not using anything yet. Receptive language, we can measure these skills through following directions, pointing to an object. If we ask a child, oh, what color or which block is blue, and seeing if they can identify, or answering questions accurately. That shows us they're understanding the type of question that you're asking. It can also be size concepts, so small and big, and understanding prepositions like in, on, out, off, all of those words too. Expressive language, this is when we start using it. So, a good rule of thumb to always remember is that a child has to have those receptive language skills first before they can start using them. So a child learns and learns and learns, and they're soaking up all of this language. And then all of a sudden, around the age of 2 years, we see like huge, huge expressive language growth. And that's because they've been spending all of this time absorbing receptively and they're learning, and now they're ready to use it. So, expressive language can be labeling objects, labeling people, describing objects. And then we keep building on those skills using two or more word combinations. So more bubbles, big bubbles, small bubbles, bubbles pop, bubbles are gone. See, there now we're getting into a three-word combination. And slowly but surely we're adding more and more and more language and more words. So there are two types of language processing, and we won't go too in depth into these areas, but I do want to make a note just because we see both of these in different children. So the first type of language processing is analytic. The second type is gestalt. Sorry, excuse me. So the first, analytic language processing. So this means that we're learning words as single units first. So we're learning single words as single units. So let's talk about some examples of this. A child learns the word go. Okay, they learn the word go, they learn what it means. So from there, they're going to add another word onto it. So as we see the first row of puzzles, go in. Okay, so from there, they're going to add even more puzzle pieces to the original piece. Go in the house. So they're taking that first word, that first puzzle piece, and they're just adding to it, which is what we usually see. But that is not to say that Gestalt language processing is atypical. So a child with Gestalt language processing learns language as a whole in phrases or sentences. And then they have this big chunk that they start breaking into smaller chunks. And then they start using those pieces with other pieces that they've learned from big chunks. So let's talk about an example of this. Um, so what can this look like? Well, a child may be repeating lines from movies or TV shows. They may have rich intonation in their speech, really sounding like adults, especially with questions, like really raising the intonation at the end, like really exaggerated. And they can also be labeled as echolalic, which is just a word that we use within child development as repeating. So let's take the phrase time to go to bed. So they learn this from a TV show. Okay, time to go to bed. Well, with a Gestalt language processor, they might use the phrase time to go to bed when it's time to go to lunch, or it's time to go home, or it's time to get on the bus. So they have this phrase learned and then they start breaking it up. Go to bed, go. And then from there, they have that go, and then they start changing that last word. Time to go to school, time to go to the bus, time to go to lunch. So they're taking that big chunk, working down, and then working back up. So it is so important to note that both types of language processing are natural forms of language development, and not one way can be labeled as correct. Gestalt language learning is often corresponded with individuals who are neurodivergent. So that would mean anybody with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, anything like that, that would fall within the neurodivergent population. But please hear me say that if a child is a Gestalt language processor, that does not mean that they fall within one of those categories. Okay, so if you do have concerns, definitely reach out to your pediatrician, your primary care provider. a local speech and language pathologist, and they can do further investigations, further evaluations on those areas. So that wraps up our introduction to language. And in the next area, we will be talking about language development and what some milestones are, as well as some risk factors for language delay. So, this language series is part of the Early Years Project, which is funded by Illinois EDDI in association, in collaboration with Illinois Hands and Voices, a Guide by Your Side. We invite you to please take our survey. So if you get your phone out and you scan the QR code with your camera, it will take you to our website where you can provide feedback and we can keep making changes as necessary. Thank you.